Paula Perry. I'm a school counselor in the Boise School District at an elementary school. And when Roger first approached me about presenting, I had that fight, flight, freeze immediately where I really froze and then I really wanted to run away. But because I don't feel like I'm an expert, I think that there are many people who know a lot more than I do. But I also understand that I have been on this journey trying to make my school more trauma informed to help support all children. And that because I have leaned so heavily on Roger and his office, that I feel like this is my due diligence to give back a little. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is uh, that I haven't been a counselor forever. So straight out of college, I taught English in Japan and then Yemen and Turkey. I've
Welcome to WebEx. Enter your access code or meeting number followed by pound.
Does anyone else hear that?
Yeah. If people could mute themselves, that would be
Enter your
great.
attendee ID number.
Uh-oh. Okay.
I've also been in taught English language learners at a community college in Austin, and I have worked at the University of Texas as an undergraduate coordinator. When my husband and I made the move up to Boise, I worked for Boise State and worked on the TRIO program grants as an educational specialist, which in my mind was a lot like a career counselor on wheels. So I feel like I've had a lot of experience around education, and after having some kids and deciding to go back to school, uh, it was in counseling, and specifically in school counseling, because that's where I feel like I could do the most good. So I graduated in the spring of 2016 and had my first job fall 2016. And soon after, the Idaho Children's Trust Fund sponsored a free screening of Paper Tigers. And I had just finished a 60 credit master's program in counseling. And yet this was the first time I had heard of ACEs. And my mind was truly blown. It was eye-opening, and I just couldn't even fathom how I hadn't heard about this before. Uh, and so I was so thankful that the Idaho Children's Trust Fund showed this. It was an absolute packed area of, it was in Boise, and I noticed a lot of counselors from Boise, but I'm sure there were a lot of private counselors, social workers, school psychiatrists, and psychologists. And there were a lot of people who were also really engaged in this discussion. So once I saw and heard about ACEs, A, I couldn't believe I hadn't heard about it before, and B, I wanted to figure out how to learn more about it. So my first point about heading towards a trauma-informed school is learn from the experts. So whether it's in person, online, through books, there's so much information out there that's really helpful and just all interconnected. So one of the things that was my big takeaway as I started to learn more is that it's risky to assume that our students haven't experienced trauma, because a lot of times childhood trauma is far more pervasive than previously believed, and it's often invisible. So we might not notice, but it might be there. So the first thing I did after seeing this screening is it asked for if I wanted to learn more, and I said, absolutely. So I got in touch with the Idaho Children's Trust Fund, and Jane Zink and Taryn Yates were willing to work with me and present what I called Acing the Aces, which I asked permission through the Boise School District if I could invite people in to learn more about ACEs. And so I sent out an invitation to fellow school counselors. This was all in the Boise School District, but I sent out invitations to school counselors, social workers, school psychologists, principals. And I just said, hey, we're going to do this, learning about ACEs if you're interested. It's going to be in February. It's going to be at the district. And I got such a huge feedback of people who wanted to learn more that I capped the first time at 50 and then added a whole nother time with another 40 or 50 people. And that was just, the people from special education and Frank Church, our non-traditional high school, all sorts of people were asking if they could come. So obviously there were a lot of people who were also interested in this. So once I kind of started hearing more about ACEs, I was looking for opportunities to learn more. So one of the things in the fall of the next year was a woman I know, Miranda Palmer, who is at was at Morley Nelson Elementary at the time, led a book study on helping traumatized children learn. And it's sponsored by the Massachusetts Advocates for Children. And you can actually go online and print out both of these first and second volumes about a report and policy agenda, as well as creating and advocating for trauma-sensitive schools for free. At the very end, I do have a link to that, but it's really chock full of information, and a lot of it focuses on what you might see in the schools, which again might show up as learning problems or behavior problems or cognitive delays, and some things that you can do. So a couple of the things that I walked away from this book study, which was at Morley Nelson and for the teachers of Morley Nelson, and Miranda let a few counselors in, which I was very thankful for, is that there are ways to, well, first of all, in teaching, you can't do the Bloom stuff until you take care of the Maslow stuff. So really addressing the physiological and psychological needs of the kids. And one of the things that Miranda did is invite in a teacher she used to work with in another district who had started morning meetings. And hearing this teacher speak about the connection and the trust that was established through morning meetings just really excited me about the idea of building these connections beyond just a regular classroom. Another thing that was talked about was creating these safe spaces in each classroom. You might call them peace corners. There's lots of different names for it, calm down corners, but it's a place where kids can go and try to self-regulate when they're feeling out of their zones. So these were a few of the takeaways I had immediately following this book study. Another thing I did is in that spring 2018, again, Roger and Jane were very busy getting out in the Boise School District and offering professional development. And they offered something called Hope Conquers ACEs. And one of the things I really appreciated about this professional development was they were able, because they were talking to educators, and a lot of times when you hear about the protective factors, it's really aimed at parents, how to reshape it to think of it through an educator's lens. And so, for example, resilience, talk about your favorite way to take care of yourself. Healthy social connection, describe the qualities of a good friend. Concrete support in times of need. What have you learned over the course of your life about needing or asking for help? Knowledge of parenting and human development. When you were an adolescent, what did you know about human development? Cognitive and social emotional competence. What do you do to calm down when you are angry or upset? And then, asking us to apply these concepts. What are you already doing that helps students recognize their strengths? So even though some of the information was starting to get more familiar for me, it was really nice to be able to readjust the lens that I was looking through these questions. And one of the things that there were a lot of mental health people in the room, but a lot of us realized that we really wanted to help people, but we weren't so good about asking for help ourselves. So you might be asking, what is a trauma-sensitive school? And the most important aspects of this is creating a safe, welcoming, and supported place where kids can go and learn. So it's also addressing trauma's impact on learning. So again, this came from that 2-book series, Helping Traumatized Children Learn, the Massachusetts Advocates for Children and the Trauma Learning Policy Initiative. So I started wondering, how could I make this happen in the school where I was? And so the very first thing is to get school level buy-in. Now, this wonderful person is my principal, Heather Scott, and she, I swear, if she was not a science teacher in a previous life, she was a counselor because she really gets people. Um, so I felt like it was a very easy ask to start bringing the information I was learning about to our school. She was totally on board. So the next step was to build a foundation at the school. So we already know that the problem is many students have traumatic experiences and that trauma can impact learning behavior and relationships at school. How do we start working on the solution, which is trauma sensitive schools that help children feel safe to learn? So what I did is in the spring of 2018, I offered a professional development, optional professional development at my school. And I took some of what Miranda had been doing with the book study and I added to it to make it a better fit for my school. So for me, one of my major interests is mindfulness. And so there's a huge tie-in with self-care and mindfulness. If you don't have a full tank, so to speak, you can't really help those who need help. So you have to make sure that you're taking care of yourself and that you have awareness of your triggers and how to care for yourself. From there, I introduced adverse childhood experiences and beyond like the 3 major categories of abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, I would also add systemic racism, bullying, foster care, just a warlike environment, you know, whether it's in your neighborhood or, you know, for those people who are coming from other countries as refugees. So I think it's really broadened my idea of what ACEs are. But in addition, a knowledge of the brain and its development. Um, and then protective factors. And I think I had, if I recall correctly, I think I had Roger come in and do the brain architecture game, which was, I love how that brings both the ACEs and the protective factors together and really in a hands-on way. And the other thing that I did at that time was asked Optum, who to come in and show what was for me a new film, Resilience, the biology of stress and science of hope. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of Nadine Burke Harris. And I think I fell in love with her right then. She's just brilliant and is doing so much. And in fact, right now, I think she is I don't want to call her the Surgeon General of California. They have a new role for her starting last year, but she is really a game changer. So basically, I offered this professional development at school where they could get credit. And I had about 10 people join, and it was teachers, special ed teacher, nurse. Um, yeah, so I think that was about 10. I think the school psychologist joined us. So it was really cool. These are people who usually are right at the forefront of any kind of initiative that you have. So that was very promising. So from there, I wanted to talk a little bit about, so if I'm doing this in the school, how am I helping the kids? Because right, you know, I've been talking about helping the adults, but one of the things that I feel very fortunate about in the Boise School District, and I don't know how other districts run, but the school counselors, especially in the elementary schools, are in the classrooms all the time. So um, I feel very fortunate that kindergarten through 6th grade, I'm in the class, every classroom, every other week. So I have a lot of contact with students and I get to really shape what my message is. And so for me, I really wanted the kids to understand themselves as well as what's happening in their brain. So this is a very busy slide, but from kindergarten through sixth grade, I really wanted them to understand the feelings that they were experiencing, how they were feeling that in their body, self-awareness of what their triggers were and how they might react, how to create a pause between that stimulus and that act or reaction, um, and giving themselves the tools for balance. Uh, One of the things that I learned was about the grump meter, where you know we it's color coded, and it's a student identifies where he or she is on the grump meter, and then different things that they can do to go back down towards that blue calm before they hit the explode. And so a tie into that is explaining using the hand model of the brain, having a student understand what's going on in their brain so they realize that they have more of a connection to and a control over what happens. So, even the kindergartners heard about different parts of their brain, like you know, for younger kids, it's the thinking brain, the feeling brain. For older kids, we're using the amygdala, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, the brain stem. And so I feel like it was really something that the kids appreciated learning about, being able to uh, know why they were doing what they were doing. At my school, we do use the toolbox tools, which is the breathing tool, the quiet safe place tool, the listening tool. There's, I think, 10 or 12 different tools that, again, the child has to decide what's right for him or her in that moment. And those, I was also very fortunate, again, because I do enjoy mindfulness, that I could even do yoga with the kids because I had such great support from my principal. So at this point, I realized I'd been working with the kids and getting them to understand their nervous system and how they might be reacting to anxiety or stress and their stress response, and starting to build on some of that resilience. And so now it was important to continue that message with the rest of the staff. So again, with the blessing of my principal, um, I we have something called professional learning communities, which are required times that staff get together and are learning specific things. And so for the all staff, specifically certified staff, I was given the opportunity for every other month to do my ACEs professional development. So just as I had done with um, those who had chosen to do a professional development, now I was doing it for all certified staff. So again, starting with self-care and self-understanding, building on adverse childhood experiences, watching resilience, learning about the 5 protective factors, playing the brain architecture game, and kind of bringing it all together. Now all the teachers were aware of ACEs, and I knew that this was a really great moment when one teacher who has been around for quite a while, actually, instead of immediately saying, this child is disruptive or has ADHD, was saying, wow, I wonder, if this child has experienced some trauma. And so that was a huge aha moment, that the message was starting to, go down to the teachers, and they were starting to realize that, you know, it's all about their lens. They can see the kid as a troubled child who has big behaviors, or they can put on that trauma lens and start wondering what happened to that child, how they can connect to that child. And I think a big takeaway for a lot of the teachers was about, the most important thing was about their relationship with the child, not that they did well on tests, but that they were building that relationship of trust and security and predictability and creating that safe environment. And then to really make it a trauma sensitive school, you really have to include everyone. And so because classified staff couldn't attend the trainings because they wouldn't be paid, they were already off the clock. I did a separate training for them when they were getting paid on the clock. And so that was the office staff, the recess staff, the librarian, um, special education assistants. And so again, it was getting that message out. What does it mean to really support children? And again, some of the feedback, which was so wonderful to hear, is that, you know, having someone say, "Oh, maybe I should tone down my sarcasm," or, "Wow, just because it's not adult level stress doesn't mean that that stress is not really having a huge impact on that student." So I feel like at this point, all educators in our building have learned about ACEs, about protective factors, and about ways to better support their students. So the last piece of the puzzle was to collaborate with colleagues around the district. So not just in the building, not just with other school counselors, but the district, the Boise School District really emphasized ACEs last year and trauma-informed education. And so I did a professional development um, last fall for anyone in the district. And it was really, I think there was 20 or 25 people. And the really nice thing about it was, yet there were some counselors, but there were a lot of, teachers, classroom teachers, special ed teachers. There's a nurse, there was a social worker. So it was a really big mix. And so it was really cool to get feedback because again, I don't consider myself an expert. I call myself a facilitator when I'm leading these things because I feel like there's a lot of valuable information that we can share with each other. And so, just getting some of the perspectives of other people in a building, and I'm elementary level, so there are a lot of high school level people there. And so again, how can you fit this to work in your environment? Um, and some of the professional development that I have benefited from was, for example, the in March, before all the crazy hit, um, there were there was a group of people from Haley who offered CRIM training, which is Community Resiliency Model, and it was like Lori Strand and Lydia Missel, I think it was Missel, from Haley, and this is where I just started seeing things so interestingly, like uh, tie in together, like their zone of resiliency. Are you bouncing out of, like if there's a traumatic event, bouncing out of that zone, high or low, really tied into some of the things that I was already aware of. Did a restorative practices with Lindsay Mesplay out of Horizon Elementary. Unfortunately, that got cut short. So because of the school closure, but I would love to learn more about that. But again, restorative practices, a lot of times they talk about these circles, which again was like morning circle. Um, I took a class called The Body, it was a book study, The Body Keeps the Score. And again, it's like one of those mind blown experiences. Bessel van der Kolk just really, of all these things I'd been learning, he just, again, just opened my mind in a way that I can't believe that developmental trauma isn't really something that is acknowledged. It certainly rings true to me. And one of the other classes, Ensuring Equity for All, was led by Leona Alexander, who's a GATE facilitator out of an elementary in Boise. But again, like everything that I was drawn to really seemed to tie into this whole concept that everyone needs to be on board as far as supporting kids. Like you can't make an assumption that someone hasn't experienced some kind of trauma in their life, especially, right now as we all go through COVID-19 and all the fallout from that and all the news that's happening right now in the US and in the world, that this isn't all just tied in. So, it's again putting those pieces together, like, my um, grump meter next to the zone of resiliency. Again, it's interconnected, it works. And then, my toolbox tools along with CRIM, again, as well as, some of the things that I've been listening to through Rogers, like the emotional first aid with Ayako Nozawa, or the strong curriculum with Maureen Durning. Like, all these things are tying in for me personally. And so, for example, when reading The Body Keeps the Score, one of the questions that was posed to us was, what would an ideal classroom include to support children impacted by trauma? And, some of the, like safety, predictability, consistency, routines, relationships, communication, clarity of expectations, face-to-face contact, feeling known and seen, trauma-informed school personnel, modeling expected and appropriate behavior. All these things are within our control and are doable. And the same is true about a counselor's space, an open door, readiness to engage with students, a calm, quiet place to escape, a safe place to talk about your pain, a person or place that they can talk freely without fear of being judged. All these things there's a lot of things that are out of our control, but I really feel like as educators, as counselors, as social workers, whatever our role is, that if we can come together and be mindful and really put the students' needs first, that we can build those relationships of trust and security and predictability, and really make it a safe environment for the students. A video that you can look up is called Making Sure Each Child is Known. It's a great activity, and I'm hoping to do it at my school this fall when we're hopefully back in the classroom. But I don't know what our in-school experience is going to be like, but I do know that there are going to be a lot of stressed out people, adults and children alike. So how are we going to best support those students? So when we look at trauma-informed practices, my question is, what do we have to lose? And my answer is nothing and everything to gain, because trauma-informed and SEL practices benefit all children. And it builds critical skills like self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, and openness to teamwork and cooperation. So really, I feel like as educators, as counselors, as social workers, whatever your role is, that it's to everyone's benefit to assume all children are trauma affected and need social and emotional learning and that support. So here's my list of references. And if you do want to contact me, it's paula.perry@boiseschools.org. And thank you.
So, Paula,
Yeah,
can you hear me okay?
I can.
I didn't have my mic down at my mouth. That was the problem initially. Um, it just seems like you've done a tremendous amount of learning and attempting to connect all these pieces together. Have you found that overwhelming, or have you found it affirming to have all those pieces woven together?
For me, it's affirming. For me, again, because I was new to counseling, it was a slow rollout for me. Like, I started small and just built on that. But I feel like because I was getting to know my staff and the school and how school counselors function, that it was a parallel journey for me, like learning and then wanting to share that with my school for the benefit of the kids.
Yeah. So I know there's people really interested in, how do you make this happen, across across school districts, across,
Mhm.
I mean, I've been impressed with what Boise schools are doing in terms of creating a trauma skilled district or their
Hmm.
discussion about doing that and taking that on, I think school by school and so on. And can you talk a little bit more about that maybe and, sort of district wide? And then I don't know,
Sure.
and I know we have people from, well, I know we have people from Canyon County and from Salmon, Idaho, and from people who are doing statewide work. There's some folks from Optima that are on the call, and
Hmm.
others who are trying to move this work, around the state. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on all of that.
Well, I think that there are some amazing resources out there. Um, your organization, Optum, there's just a lot of willing and able people who want to get the word out. So for me, it's connecting. Well, for me, I feel like I was lucky in my time and place that both my at a school level and a district level, that there was a lot of support and interest in uh, adverse childhood experiences and protective factors and trauma-informed schools. So I feel like I was in a very safe place to try to spread the word. As far as other districts, I would say again, tapping into those who have knowledge and trying to build that base where uh, you do have buy-in from, the leaders as well as the teachers. One thing that I did learn is uh, you never want to make more work for teachers. They're already overwhelmed. And so if you can point out that they're already doing so much of this, they're all about supporting their students and being empathetic and greeting those students, one-on-one and knowing something special about them and making those students feel seen and heard. They already do that, but if you let them know that um, they're halfway there, it doesn't feel like this huge burden that you're putting on them, that you're actually just encouraging them in the direction that they're already going.
So I don't want to hog the question time. So if there are people, either if you want to put something in the chat and I'll read it to Paula, or if you have questions, open your mic, that would be great. I will say that, so there's a comment from Jane Zink, and she said, I wish I could stay longer, and she left about just a little before you were done. She said, Paula Perry, you are doing such great work, changing lives, changing futures.
Well, I leaned heavily on both Roger and Jane. So if there are experts in your life, please, like tap into them, because I'm sure, I don't mean to speak for you or Jane, but I can only assume that the more people who have an understanding, the more change we can evoke.
And then Chrissy Bowers from Optum says, excellent, Paula. That was I know Scott Brand from Salmon has been doing work in the Salmon School or Salmon High School on social emotional learning. I don't know if you have anything to throw in here.
Are you asking me or Scott?
I'm asking Scott, and
Okay, good.
he was, I don't know, I think he's still on. Maybe he got off. No, I see him there. Maybe he has nothing to add.
I'm not Scott, but I work at the Mahoney House.
Great, Erica, you do it. I just thought you guys are doing stuff in this space, and I just thought maybe you could add something to the statewide discussion.
So yeah, this year we are serving grades. Well, grade 1 is a little bit modified, but grade 1 through 7 with social emotional learning in the Salmon schools. And
Nice.
so we're in the schools, I want to say 4 days a week, all 4 days a week, because it's a 4 days a week system there. And yeah, we are using the 5 protective factors framework. And that's what all of our lessons are built off of. I do see Scott now on there, so he can add anything he would like to. But yeah, it's been going really well. I think we've been able to get buy-in from the schools because we are the ones going in and doing it. So rather than adding more on teacher plates like you were discussing, we're actually able to come in during a time that was already scheduled for them to be out of the classroom and work with students in that realm. So that's, I don't know if you want to know more about that, but like I said, Scott's on now too if he wants to say any more.
He said his audio is not working.
Oh, bummer, dude.
I think you have to speak for him,
Oh,
which he
watch
likes.
out.
I'm sure he likes that.
Yeah. Well, that's, I don't know. That's all I have to say for now.
But so
Yeah,
that's
that's
a different,
fantastic. Yeah.
it's a somewhat different model in the sense that you're coming from the outside, going into the school, doing this work. Paula's doing the work internally, from the from her staff position, and then also taking that out into the full district
Mhm.
to teach them. I just think it's nice to, understand that there probably are different ways for us to get at this, but I think it just really highlights the critical nature of doing it. Does anybody else have any questions they'd like to either throw into the chat um, or open their mic and talk to us?
So, Roger, I did want to say in my references, there's this really cool printable called What Survival Looks Like in School. And I have not used it with kids, but I have shared it with teachers. And the really neat thing is it, for example, it's fight, flight, freeze. And it says, what I am aware of, what I look like, how my body feels, what's happening in my inner world, and how you can make me feel safe for each of those. And it's just really pretty cool to um, have a teacher understand, like, oh, this child is not being stubborn, or this child is really just closed off and is totally in freeze. For example, just to have better idea of behaviorally what something might look like and how they could potentially help that student. But it's something out of, I believe, England. So they have it for the high school or older kids and younger kids. And it was just something I thought was pretty cool.
There are a few more chats. Let me throw those in here. Jessica Verwine, who's with Lutheran Community Services. I don't think I got that right again. She says, thank you for sharing your journey. So many wonderful resources to learn from. There's a self-guided TBRI, trust-based relational intervention training opportunity available for free right now through the end of July. And she's put the link in the chat. Wendy Stoneberg from Optum, and we have to give credit to Optum for really putting out the paper tigers and resilience and making that available for us to use at various points for the last few years. But Wendy says Optum has copies of both paper tigers and resilience that we love to share free of charge with communities and schools. So that is available as a resource, and they have been really helpful in doing that on a regional basis. Even when we did something up in Salmon, somebody came up from Idaho Falls. When we did something in Malad, somebody came down from Pocatello, and so they've been very, very available. So thank you, Optum.
Thank you, Optum.
Aya Nazawa says, Paula, thank you very much for your great presentation. I'm inspired by your work and so lucky to be in Boise District. Gotta go, but would love to keep talking. I don't know, Mahoney House. I don't know if Mahoney House is Scott. Maybe this is Scott. How have you been able to get the needed buy-in from the skeptics at the school? We have buy-in
That's
from those. We have buy-in from those that matter, but need more from some of the
right.
teachers.
I absolutely agree. And I think this is true on like anything, that you always have those people who are right off the bat are willing to try and engage and put it into their new way of being. And then you always have those people who are like, oh, when are they going to retire? Because they're just not. But then again, they can be younger teachers too. But yeah, there's always going to be those people who are really resist. And so and it's at all levels, at all schools. So there's no magic answer, but I I guess I don't give up on them, and I just keep trying to give them different approaches. Um, so I guess part of that is I really do see trying to find the best in everyone, as as what I ask them to do in a student. So I try to do that with them as well, because I think that for whatever reason, there are skeptics, and even though there's so much research out there, somehow they think that um, embarrassing or humiliating is the way to get the kid to behave. And um, so, however, I don't have an answer really, but there are always going to be those people. But I just feel like the more information you can give them, and the more they see it happening around them, like when I introduced morning meetings, it's definitely not required, but it started with fourth grade, and then a sixth grade teacher decided to do it, and then the first graders teachers decided to do it, and so it's kind of building on its own. But there's certain things, unless it really comes from the principal or the district, you're not necessarily going to change them.
Yeah. Any other questions? Scott said Optum is great. Thank you. I make sure your schmooze gets through. He's not smiling. Um, okay. Uh, so if there's no other, are there any other questions? I'll give it a minute. I know this is it was a content-rich presentation, lots of things there. So Jessica asks, are you doing any work with the parents or hearing about their needs?
Yeah, what's been interesting in the Boise School District is that we have parent education available, and I think it's a very small charge. And in the 4 years I've been in the district, it's there have been fewer and fewer classes because parents haven't been taking them. And so I feel like there might need to be a big reworking there. And this past spring, before Crazy hit, Miranda and I had offered a free parent ed that really focused on ACEs and protective factors and free childcare and dinner. Like we threw in the kitchen sink, and we decided that we needed at least 4 families to commit to it, and we couldn't even get that. And so I honestly, I I feel like we need a reworking, a retooling of what it is that parents need, and try to address that, because whatever we're offering right now is not necessarily the need. Like it's the need from an educator's point of view, but it's not necessarily the need from the parent's point of view. So I feel like there's some retooling that needs to happen. But on an individual level, I do work with parents, and I don't necessarily talk about adverse childhood experiences with my elementary school kids, but I talk to parents about it and their awareness of it. Um, yeah.
We have to go with the Roger Sherman plan to make parenting education cool program. But but you're
Yeah.
probably really right that it has to be consumer driven. Let's see. Someone says, thanks, this was great. That was Judy Gabbard. And then Florina says, I love the quote about taking care of Maslow before Bloom. I think it's especially important now.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. I think going into the fall, for whatever it holds, we're going to have a lot of families who are going to need that much more support. And so I'm very thankful, in the Ada County and throughout the state, that there are some pretty amazing places there that do support families.
I'll give it another minute, little time. I'll make a couple. Say a couple of things. One is you mentioned Toolbox, and we are going to have Becky Eisenman Carson do a
Yeah.
presentation in 2 weeks. I think she's gonna do one the week or July 7th. And next week we have Karen Nelson from from Families Together in Moscow, who is going to talk about adapting curriculum for families who either have a child with a disability or they themselves are disabled, to do adaptations of curriculum so that people can see and focus on the importance of doing that and why that makes a difference. So she is going to do that presentation Tuesday at 2 o'clock, and you'll get a invitation to that in well, probably in a few minutes, actually. I sort of wait until the last one's over before I send out the next one, but that's where we're at. Paula, I don't see any more questions coming in. And as I said, this recording will be up on our YouTube channel as of tomorrow. Takes that long for it to download and stuff. And then we'll add this video, which I thought was actually kind of a neat video about, knowing all the kids and, how you can build that into your school process. So that was very cool. Again, thanks, Paula. Really appreciate it. This is really important stuff that you're doing, and, thanks for giving us, the opportunity to see how all of this work that all of us do kind of ends up being, brought into some place and then being put into practice. And that's really what we all want to be about.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.